meditating and doing these specific asanas every single day in the 6-month period. And because of that, it activated something. I was just laying in Shavasana after a practice one day, and I felt like someone had taken a piece of saran wrap and put it on top of my third eye. It was so heavy. I couldn't move my body. I was completely paralyzed. It felt like an hour, but I'm sure it was probably only a minute. And then suddenly I could see in my mind's eye all of these golden lights, like I was moving through a tunnel or like moving through some type of dimensional experience. It was very psychedelic.
There's a lot of mystics on the internet. Shout out and much love, you crazy fools, that could use dusting off a textbook or two, warmly, without judgment. And secondarily, there are certainly a lot of scholars in academia who would be well served by eating a mushroom. So I'm trying to bridge those two worlds. I'm Bob Peck, and this is Karmic Relief.
My background is in documentary film and comparative religion. I wrote a book called Original Sin is a Lie, How Spirituality Defies Dogma and Reveals Our True Self.
It's an interview show where I talk to spiritual teachers, activists, scholars, people that live within these traditions and also appreciate the overlap. What happens when you start to get activated internally, that makes you activated in a compassionate way in the world. I'm thrilled to be talking to fantastic, inspiring human beings. I have to do much less work, which is nice because I'm just asking them questions about their story. It's a life hack.
Hi.
I hope you'll enjoy these explorations, these really excavations. In the ones I've filmed so far, they've all been really beautiful and deep and lighthearted. So please enjoy Karmic Relief. I'm Bob Peck. I wrote Original Sin is a Lie, and now I'm asking a bunch of questions to intelligent, compassionate humans.
Madeline Vu is integrating all of it. Mind, body, spirit, and the planet. She is holistically aware of a wide variety of psychological systems, spiritual healing modalities, and environmental issues. She makes it seem possible. We really can acknowledge all parts of ourselves and our planet in a loving way. Her titles over the past 14 years include writer, nonprofit leader, design director, leadership coach, and tech executive. Nowadays, she's focused on integration. Madeline is a certified practitioner of focalizing, trained by Nick Werber of the Focalizing Institute. She's also studied as a clairvoyant healer and as a Reiki Master under the Usui lineage. Madeline is a Vietnamese-American who had to break patterns both in herself and her family's generational trauma, not through cessation or negation, but through expansion. Her deep spiritual and psychological study in multiple schools of thought has led her to new plateaus. The knowledge settles, and it becomes embodied wisdom.
All right, welcome back to Karmic Relief. I'm Bob Peck. I am the author of Original Sin is a Lie, and because it is. And I'm here today with my guest, Madeline Vu. Madeline is an old friend of mine from the 1970s back in Berkeley. And just kidding, we're not that old. No, I knew Madeline at UT, and we were both kind of living different lives because it was 13 years ago.
Yeah.
But I've really enjoyed kind of reconnecting with you after a decade or so. You're a very deep practitioner of a variety of healing modalities, and you integrate spirituality, you integrate psychology, you integrate environmental ideas and social equity into your work as well. So I'm really glad to have you, and I'm looking forward to another great conversation with you. Your background is you're Vietnamese.
I am Vietnamese-American, yeah.
Which influences your work in some ways, clearly.
Yeah.
And when we were talking about this episode, you mentioned, because we're both non-duality nerds, and we both like a lot of the same teachers.
Mm-hmm.
But you thought it might be interesting to talk first about the Vietnamese fairy tale
Oh, yeah.
of non-duality.
Yeah. Yeah, the Vietnamese mythology of how the first 100 Vietnamese people were born is just so fascinating to me. And I did not understand this mythology till very recently, actually. My journey has been being this bridge between being Vietnamese but also American, which is very challenging. And that journey in itself is challenging because you're not one or the other, you're both. And sometimes that's hard for people to understand. And I came across this mythology over the last year, which I have never heard before. But essentially, the first 100 Vietnamese people come from the union of a mountain fairy and a dragon. So when you think about that mythology, Vietnamese people are both water and mountain, stillness and movement, masculine and feminine. And then when you connect that to the history of the country, a lot of scholars talk about how we're both the North and the South. If you're familiar with the Vietnam War, our country was split into two. There was a civil war, larger other proxy wars associated with that too. But when you think about that mythology, it's really, really beautiful to think about how you can be both and the power it is to be one with
Right.
both of those concepts. Yeah.
Right, which you embody so well because you are American,
Mm-hmm.
you are Vietnamese,
Mm-hmm.
and we talked about this too. It's almost like it could go either way. Like you know,
Yeah.
I don't see you as anyone other than
Right.
American to me.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the case for other Americans,
Mhm.
you know, on the land of duality out here. But in Vietnam too, I'm sure like,
Yeah.
you know, they would, certain people would embrace you, and then other people might
Yeah.
say, oh, well, she's American. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
it's almost just, it comes up to the individual and their
Yeah.
perception.
Yeah, there's also a word in Vietnamese for people that are not born in Vietnam. It's
Mm,
called Viet Kieu. You're like from overseas. So
interesting.
I'm actually labeled as like a third type of entity. And the first time I visited was in 2010, and it felt very off-putting. Like I didn't feel like I belonged. But I went back recently last year in 2023, and it was such a beautiful experience. Yeah,
After maybe you leveled up a bit too,
yeah, I think
probably.
I just found who I was. You know, when you are very young, so much of your identity is outside of you. You know, and I think being the first person to be born in the United States, both my parents were born in Vietnam. I didn't really have a lot of models to look up to, so I had to figure out everything myself, which was a very fascinating experience. But growing up with parents that went through very traumatic experiences because of the war, they were both refugees. That put a lot of pressure on me growing up to be successful, to do things a specific way. And then my parents were essentially living out of a lot of fear, right? They're coming here, starting completely over. And, you know, that's a lot of pressure to put on a child. And I actually took on a lot of that. And so when we met Bob, I felt like I was such a different person and I was living someone else's story that was not my own, essentially. And I think throughout the last, how long has it been? Like 20 years? No, not 20, 15.
Yeah, I guess 15.
Throughout
yeah.
the 15 years, I felt like it's been such a journey to come back home to myself. And that's been through seeing all these shadow parts of myself, all these parts of myself that have been hidden, that were very, very hurt, all these little inner children, and then calling them back home. But that's been through like radical compassion, radical acceptance for who I am as a person, rather than judgment, fear, and other kind of frequencies that are so common today. You know, I appreciate your work so much. I was raised Catholic. And, you know, when I read your book, it really resonated with me because it made me think about how so many of us have been programmed to live in shame and fear, and for others to use that for a sense of power, right? When we think about the Bible, we think about these doctrines, they were created by other people, and they don't necessarily represent like the original teachings of Jesus, for example, or other ascended masters. So to help people remember that again, I just like really resonate so much with your work. And I think part of the reason why we've also reconnected again during this period in time where we're also very different people. Yeah.
Well, beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that it touched you. And, your story is incredible in terms of coming through the immigrant experience, but also coming through what your dad experienced, which whatever level you're comfortable talking about with him, and kind of it's there's like this full circle, like Phoenix from the ashes kind of story that I get from you and kind of from him in terms of your continuation, like the Catholicism and the fear, but also like his trauma after the war and kind of you growing up confused in this environment, and then your 20s and like now early 30s, and then you're just like cracking through, all this kind of baggage of buildup of like ancestral generational stuff.
Yeah.
It's really profound to me. So
I'm
glad that my hunk of wood
No, it came at such an intense time. I read your book. You had not even published it yet. You got
the G-Doc. Okay, cool. Yeah, there's about a dozen people that read the G-Doc, so that's the homies.
Yeah, it was during the pandemic. It was like 2020 or something. And I remember, or even before then, and I was like reading it on a plane. Yes, it was before the pandemic.
I think it was 2021.
2021?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good.
Thank you.
But it helped me so much. The last 4 years of my life, I've been through so much death and rebirth. To your point, there was so much pressure being built up where I had to shed all these ways of being that didn't align anymore. And to do that, I had to go through this really intense storm. I did not make peace with my father's story until he passed away in 2021. And that was because I had to take a step back and understand his story, have compassion for his story as a person, and understand the immense stress that he had to go through. That's really hard to do when you're acting from your inner child. And then growing up, we did not have a very stable environment. And that was because of the trauma that he went through. I did not necessarily understand that until I was much older. I was doing a research project when I was 18 and I found out about it. And then I recently found out more when I went to Vietnam and my cousin explained more things to me. But, essentially my family is from Hanoi, which is in North Vietnam. And in 1954, there was a great migration that happened where, many families in the North, due to propaganda actually from the United States, the CIA, decided to move. Shocker, yeah. Decided to move their entire families to the South because they felt like it would be safer rather than to be in the North where there was a communist party. So there was some propaganda there from the U.S. kind of leading that that mentality. But essentially, my family decided to move to the South. On my dad's side, he was very young, maybe like 7 years old. And his father actually decided to stay behind because he really believed in the cause. The Vietnam War was very complicated. Vietnam has been colonized for over 2,000 years. And when the French decided to leave, Vietnamese people actually wanted to have their own government. That's what sprung up the Communist Party. In reaction to that, the United States, France, and other powers were trying to gain control over that region. There was essentially, a proxy to try to control the region.
It's a strategic territory.
It's very strategic territory, yeah. And for me to even understand this story now in this nuanced way took me a really long time. Because it was very traumatic for my family. And
growing up in America, it's North bad, South
exactly.
good. I mean, it's very sanitized.
It's very sanitized.
Yeah.
And then when I learned about my family's own history, I was like, oh, wow, this is really complicated. So my grandfather really believed in this cause. And he's like, I'm not leaving. I want to stay here. And so my father basically lost his father for that cause. And then when his family went to Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City now, his mom got so distressed she actually decided to abandon all of her children. And so my father essentially became an orphan. And imagine going through that. He ended up getting drafted many years later, got drafted into the South Vietnamese Armed Forces, and had to serve in the war for 10 plus years. When Saigon fell, he got put in a re-education camp, which was really common. And so he was in this camp for 1 or 2 years. He actually ended up being able to reconnect with his father after that process, which he hasn't talked too much about it. I don't know too much about it, but my grandfather passed away in 1991, I believe. I was born in 1988. But
your dad was in a camp that was controlled by the folks that your grandfather was a part of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was actually through their connection that my father was able to be released a little bit earlier. He had friends that were in re-education camps for 10 plus years. So it's really insane. And when my father was able to be released, he decided that he wanted to leave Vietnam. He then proceeded to try to escape 7 different times and was caught and put in prison 7 different times. So, his story teaches so much about resilience, literally the resilience to survive, to liberate yourself, to have freedom for yourself. And on the last time, that 7th time, he was able to escape the country. He got a fake ID saying that he was Chinese. So there was this movement towards the end of the Vietnam War where, the Vietnamese government at that time wanted to remove or expel a lot of Chinese nationals. And so my father got this fake ID. That's how he was able to leave. He was very lucky. He was essentially one of the boat people that you see on PBS or different documentaries. But a French cargo ship found their boat and rescued them. And so he was able to live in Paris, I think, for a year before his aunt sponsored him to come to the United States. And that's how he ended up in Houston.
It's like a Hollywood
story.
I
know.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah. And, my story is not unique. There are many stories like this of this refugee experience. And when we think about the United States in general, it's actually a country of so many displaced people. And we have a unique opportunity to take all of these disparate stories and how do you actually unify everybody? That's an interesting story of non-duality too. But unfortunately, there's so much polarity happening in this country.
I thank you for sharing. And I know that, I'll just say at the top, as a white American man, my folks have been in Texas for 100 years. Mm-hmm. And we kicked out the Apaches and Comanches, unjustly, and had a war with Mexico. Mm-hmm. So it belongs anywhere, really, is the question. But in terms of my background, what I want to say is I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
And it's really, I think, my favorite characteristic of America is that it is the that green gal or whatever with the torch to say, hey, this is a place of safety and freedom and inclusivity, and you can say what you ought to say here. That's the extent of my patriotism. It gets complicated quickly.
It does get complicated.
Thanks to folks in power and the hypocrisies and greed and so on. But I think as the other person in this conversation, I just wanted to make sure that comes across. And then secondarily, I know that that's the beginning of his story. The kind of latter half, if you will, of his story is that he had to deal with all of this mentally and psychologically and psycho-emotionally. And so that was a challenge for you guys.
It was a huge challenge, My father had severe PTSD, never sought treatment for it. In our culture, especially the old school mentality. People didn't really believe in therapy. They're like, you're wasting your money. You're just paying someone to talk about your problems. And then there's also kind of cultural nuance to that too, where there's this concept of like silently suffering. For example, you don't talk about hardships because you don't want to burden other people. There's literally this Vietnamese phrase where when someone passes away, you say, oh, chia buon. Chia buon literally translates to let me share your pain with you. So when you attend someone's funeral, that's the term that you, because it's such a collective culture. So to like share things, you could be sharing your burdens with someone else. So my father held a lot inside. And because of that, it actually made our home life very unstable. It made me feel very disembodied when I was a child. That was the safest way in which I could operate and like be here. But it also helped inform one of my modalities, which is in a somatic therapy called focalizing. It helped me so much because I realized this trauma response that I had in reaction to a very unstable environment. I was withdrawing, basically freezing and then fleeing from the situation, even though I was physically here. And I spent so much of my life just completely disembodied. And, you know, one of my tenets whenever I work with my clients that really informs my work is like embodiment is this pathway to liberation. If we're not in the here and the now and really fully feeling our body, fully feeling our feelings, our emotions in our body, sensing them, dissolving them, moving through things with just radical compassion for ourselves, we're actually not here, you know, and then we're reacting out of fear. We are reacting out of shame, out of guilt, out of these other behaviors that don't really do anyone service, you know.
And so you experience this process.
Yes,
you know,
I
it's
did.
like you kind of, that's
Yeah.
like my friend James has the quote, James McRae has a quote where he says, God give me the strength of a 22-year-old life coach.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like there's a
Yeah.
level of like folks out there that are that haven't done the extent of the work, you know, and not to be too egoic here, but
Yeah.
you know, that's what I appreciate about it is like you had to put all this together to figure it out in your own process, in your own practice. And now you're saying, hey, okay, I was able to use focalizing. I was able to use somatic healing. I was able to learn Reiki. I was able to reconnect with your Vietnamese Buddhist, you know, interfaith background. And all these things creates 2024 Madeline and beyond. Before we go on from there, the disembodied piece, like, what do you mean by that? Like, I mean, I think people who listen to this show and me ramble probably have some idea, but can you be more specific in terms of like, you know, using the whiskey to stiff arm the feelings? I mean, right? Is that essentially what it is?
I mean, I think when you think about alcohol or other substances or substance abuse, it's a symptom, right? You are using something because it's very uncomfortable to be in the body. Many of us do not have the capacity to fully feel our emotions, to fully experience pain, experience grief, experience love, because we are taught to really separate our mind from our body. So much of our practice, especially in the last 200 years with the Industrial Revolution, I think about psychotherapy and Freud, everything is about the mind. And that's actually very masculine when you think about logic, structure, control. You know, that is actually very masculine. And if we're going to tie this to esoteric teachings or tie it to other spiritual practices, the feminine usually represents our body. And if I think about your work and how it centers Jesus Christ, for example, we also have to talk about Mary Magdalene. I really believe she was his counterpart. I'm named after her also.
Oh, wow.
And so I actually had to go through a whole journey of learning her story I ended up taking a few classes with Megan Watterson, who is
Shout out.
a wonderful theologian who focuses on divine feminine practices, but really has resurfaced Mary Magdalene's story in all of her gospels and all of her teachings. And when I think about the masculine and the feminine, those two things have split almost completely. You know, over the ages, Christ has become more and more monastic, more and more kind of like holy. And then Mary Magdalene's story has become just more darker and darker, right? Oh, she's a prostitute now.
Yeah, it's like she's got a bad rap,
Yeah.
even that people think that she was the prostitute, but that's another character in the New Testament. That's
Yes,
not
exactly.
Even her.
It's not even her. You're
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
But she represents all the human parts of us, you know? So when you think about that duality, it's like, oh, the divine is this monastic thing that you'll never achieve that's outside of you. And all the human parts are just like so horrible, sinful. And, you know, so when I think about that, it's so fascinating. And very recently, I think there's just been this rise of the feminine coming back. And that's when people are like, oh, this is what it feels like to be embodied. Somatic therapy really did not become formalized until the 80s. Dr. Peter Levine is probably someone that you've heard before, who created somatic experiencing, for example. So this is it's wild to think like it's taking us so long to come back. And when I think about coming back into the body and really being here and fully present and fully comfortable to feel all of our feelings, to have capacity to hold space for other people, that also brings us back to our connection to Earth, which is a feminine entity, and taking care of the Earth, you know, and we are not separate from the Earth either, right? We are one with the Earth. So it's important right now to think about embodiment and how it connects us to everyone else. When we are disembodied, it's a lot easier for us to inflict pain onto others, to lash out, for example, because we feel very disconnected. But when we are actually in our bodies, we have the capacity to feel empathy for another person that's sitting here, because we are witnessing them. We feel their presence. Our hearts are open. And that's such a nuanced experience. And that's really hard to do when there's generational trauma. There's, you know, intergenerational trauma. There's also kind of community trauma or relational trauma that's happening around you. So
it's painful.
It's really painful.
Yeah.
It's really painful.
Well, I really, that was so well articulated, and there's a few directions I want to go from there. I even back to Mary Magdalene, I think she's introduced as the woman who conquered the ills or something. Like,
yes, she was a Miraphor. So a Miraphor is a practitioner that specializes in oils. So back in the day, oils had medicinal properties to them. So myrrh is a resin, for example. It was used in that time period for healing. So you could use these oils to heal.
She was
basically.
a healer also. Yeah. And that Megan Watterson book, Mary Magdalene Revealed, which, by the way, thanks for the rec, Madeline. Terrific book. And that was my one regret. I'd say probably big asterisk on Original Sin is a Lie is not enough Mary.
Yeah.
Not enough really female mystics, admittedly. And you and I have been talking about this. I think I'm going to mention it on every podcast, but Women of Power and Grace. And I interviewed Tim Conway.
Oh, amazing.
So he'll be published by now or soon.
I love that.
But I like all my future work is going to have a lot more female mystics. And so, but yeah, there's that piece where she says she's introduced as the woman who basically, like what Megan Watterson says, is her title includes her transcendental quality to overcome things, you know? And so there's this really strong connection with you. I mean, that's pretty beautiful and synchronistic that you just happen to be named after her.
Yeah, Yeah.
So
I actually asked my mom, I was like, why did you name me after her? She's like, oh, it's because she loved Jesus the most. I just thought that was like the funniest answer.
that's a really good, like,
Yeah.
good Catholic mom answer
Yeah,
for
good
like
Catholic
this
mom answer.
super deep, mystical, esoteric connection that you have underlying all of that. That's adorable. Thanks, Mom. I mean, the other thing too, when you're talking about embodiment, you know, to me, where my mind goes is to one of you and I's biggest heroes, which, how far in are we? 29 minutes. And we've talked Vietnam,
Yeah.
and we've talked embodiment, feeling it in your body. There's an inevitable Thich Nhat Hanh reference, because it seems like mindfulness is a lot of what you're talking about. And that's cohesive, I think, in both our work in terms of like the perennial philosophy and like the overlap between all these ideas. That's what I get so excited about. But my goodness, Thich Nhat Hanh, that's his whole thing. He doesn't care about heaven or hell or, you know, really much symbolism, or, you know, which is cool. And there's other aspects, and maybe we can go into the mindful, metaphysical, non-dual thing that you and I love. But, you know, he breathing in, I'm here. Breathing out, I know that I'm here. I mean, breathing in, I feel it in my lungs. Breathing, you know, it's like that's the whole process of like this almost overly simplistic. It's almost too simple, but it's not, because
it's perfect,
has all of it.
Yeah, I think there's one thing that I wanted to say when you were talking about knowledge and how we've amassed a lot of knowledge. I haven't, by the way. I mean, we all have knowledge, but it doesn't become wisdom until we experience it. So when we fully experience what it's like to be fully online, in touch with our emotions, and really slowing down so much to, you know, where you can feel your breath moving so slow. It took me a really long time to get here. Because I was carrying just so much pain in my body, generationally, having the protection mechanism to be just not even here, and just thinking and being in the mind. It took me a really long time because I was conditioned to use that as a protection mechanism. And it wasn't until I could feel safe again.
Oh, you use that anxiety let me just transmute that into productivity. And I providing think a lot value for my shareholders.
And that was most of my journey, my professional journey. Like when I lived in New York City for
you provided a lot of shareholder value.
I did, you know, and that is just, that patterning is something that is, we've all been there. You know, I think the pandemic was a force function that changed a lot of things, and I really do think when people got laid off, when everyone had to go inside and we were all in lockdown, it forced us to slow down, take a look at ourselves, reevaluate what was important to us. I think that was a really big wake-up call for a lot of people. I certainly went through so much during that time too, you know. I
said I have 50,000 words of random stuff. I should put it into something. So I hear you. And things have been changing since then.
Well, your piece about mindfulness, when I think about my kind of journey as a spiritual practitioner, you know, I was raised Catholic. When I graduated from high school, I became very concerned about the Catholic Church, you know, where it was going. I did not necessarily feel very connected with those practices. It feels like something that you just do, like a routine. I didn't necessarily connect too much with the practices, and I actually
there's a mechanical.
It was very mechanical. I actually became atheist, and through that I learned more about mindfulness, meditation. That was what I was practicing for a really long time. But I felt very disconnected from my spiritual body. It felt like I was, again, just going through the motions. But when you have 20 plus years of conditioning to be disembodied and you're doing mindfulness practices, I felt like I was very much still in my mind. But through that pathway, it actually opened up a lot of metaphysical things that happened to me while I was meditating. I kind of liken it to like someone lifting a veil off of my third eye when I was 25 years old. And that was very scary. I was experiencing something that felt very uncomfortable. I was seeing things. I was like, wait, is that there? To maybe give more details, I was simply meditating and doing these specific asanas every single day in the 6-month period. And because of that, it activated something. I was just laying in Shavasana after a practice one day, and I felt like someone had taken a piece of saran wrap and put it on top of my third eye. It was so heavy. I couldn't move my body. I was completely paralyzed. It felt like an hour, but I'm sure it was probably only a minute. And then suddenly I could see in my mind's eye all of these golden lights, like I was moving through a tunnel or like moving through some type of dimensional experience. It was very psychedelic. If I were to take a step back and look at this from the lens of like a scientist, I probably hit some state where a lot of dopamine, a lot of DMT got activated, and I had a psychedelic experience that got induced through meditation as the channel rather than LSD or something like that.
Right.
But through that experience, it was very scary because I couldn't move my body and I was just seeing all these things. I couldn't control anything. But I saw, like, when I went through the tunnel, it was like I could see another dimension in the room, and I could see all these entities and other things like walking around, and it really scared me so much.
Oh, wow.
And, at the time I had a teacher, a mindfulness teacher, and she was more in the Zen tradition. So when I told her all these things, she was like, wow, you have an amazing ability to imagine. And I was like, what? And for 3 years.
Because Zen is just like,
exactly.
We're just washing the bowl here.
Exactly. You're right.
We're not worried about it.
Yeah. It took me a really long time to also understand that there are many paths to one. Like, I was so anchored to one path being the truth because I was so scared.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really common thing for a lot of people out there practicing. So I stopped doing anything for 3 months. It just scared me so much. I didn't feel like I had the right support.
I haven't seen any entities walking around. I think it would be pretty spooky.
Yeah.
I don't blame you, 26-year-old, 25-year-old Madeline.
Yeah. And then when I moved to New York, I found another teacher. She was a breathwork practitioner, but she also worked with the Shipibo people in Peru. So with ayahuasca, for example, and just through her lineage, it just helped me piece together a lot of things. And it actually wasn't until I listened to your podcast, Be Here Now.
That's the problem with the branding, is that nobody remembers or knows what it was. No, it's okay. What's funny is you really loved the show.
Loved the show so much.
And that's how bad the name was. Beware How.
Beware How. Okay.
A joke on Be Here Now. And
yes.
I'm calling it season 1 of it. This is kind of still
okay.
me talking.
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring my old friends on too.
Yeah.
Sometimes, but
it
was a group of us talking about mindful. We kind of did a series: mindfulness, metaphysical,
yes,
non-dual.
Yes, and it wasn't until I heard you actually categorize things that way, it just clicked so much. I was like, oh, there are many paths to one. I'm having a very metaphysical experience, and I think you actually helped me. Give me the language to talk about that, which was really, really helpful.
What a pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, oh, wow, I've experienced all of these paths are really valid. There's, from a comparative perspective, there are many practices in each of these that are valuable for everyone to practice. You know? And it should feel true to you, your truth. Yeah.
And any method can get you there.
Any method can get you there.
Yeah. Ramakrishna has a great image of, he was very simple. He was illiterate, and he would go into samadhi. Actually, I love Ramakrishna because that's one of the words that came up when you're describing your not being able to move your body and having visuals. Like samadhi, like he would fall down and hurt himself. Actually, his nephew would have to walk by him because every day he would go into samadhi and like he would like get like his like cuts and stuff.
Oh my gosh.
And bruises. So he would like catch him. Catch his uncle
Yeah.
But so anyway, he has a great image where he says, there's plenty of ways to get on the roof of the house.
Yeah.
You can go up the stairs, you
Yeah.
can take a ladder, you
Mm-hmm.
can scale the fence, you can climb up the tree and jump, you can swing from a rope. It's like I love how just elementary that image is, but people are arguing all day long.
All day long.
And they have no, it's really, really simple. Like, it's the same roof of the house of the world that we're all on, but there's just a lot of ways to get to the top, and it takes a little bit of work, and some ways are different. I think he continued that analogy to say, like, scaling the back of the wall of the house is like, that's the tantric path, because like it's a little more vertical and whatever, whereas maybe the traditional religious is just the ladder. It's so anyway. But let's go comparative religion. And so you kind of, that was when you shifted a little bit from your kind of mindfulness Zen training to say, hey, what's up with this astral land?
What's up with this astral land? I started training in a clairvoyant practice. One of my teachers, she's out in California. I ended up training for the last 4 years, and it was just so helpful for me because for the first time, I felt like I was finally online. Like, all parts of my being were being fully activated.
What was that like?
When I think about being a human and fully using our body, we are such a channel to the divine because we're both fully divine and fully human.
Yeah.
When we accept both of those truths within ourselves, it's almost as if your mind, your heart, and all of your lower chakras can finally connect. And then you're also able to connect to your other bodies, like your etheric body, all these other subtle bodies, our energy body, our emotional bodies, our mental bodies, all become connected. And there's just so much more awareness. And living life as this channel and fully being embodied and connected to your other subtle bodies feels like this really beautiful balance between being and doing, where you're able to be quiet, listen, receive insights, messages, inspiration, and then there is the act of doing or creating. Both of those come together so beautifully. I felt like so much of my life I was just doing without really the other part of it, the being part. And so
So you are American.
I am American and Vietnamese.
Doing without being.
Yeah.
Congrats. This is the States, baby. We just do.
It's capitalism at its finest, And
Yeah.
I mean, we've been conditioned to it. None of this is anyone's fault. We're just born in a world right now where there are incentives for us to do that, right? To make money for other people, to be productive, to be a cog in the wheel.
Yeah. And I like too what you said about kind of activated work, because also, by the way, if anyone hasn't heard of these ideas, Google the word kosha, Kosha, because there's rishis that were sitting on the top of the Himalayas 3,000 years ago, and that explained all of this that we're starting to understand now. We're finally catching them, because that's a Sanskrit word for sheath, and so there's 5, I believe, but there's a variety of esoteric kind of takes on how many there are, but the idea is that they do indeed exist. And I really, I like the activation action, because I think in terms of like, what am I really trying to do? One of the things is spiritual myth busting, frankly, because there's a lot of misunderstanding, I can say, I think neutrally without judgment, that, my heroes do that. Ram Dass does that. Yogananda does that in their work. And there's a big misconception, and maybe this is a theme of the show because I feel like it's come up already, but, the idea around spirituality is just sitting around. And it is important that the pendulum is swinging towards being right now, because we've all been doing a lot. And also, I we were joking about this coffee shop. I am a doer, and I like it, and I like doing, and maybe there's something under the hood with that, that I'm open to excavating also. But at the same time, like, spirituality and like the practice of being does make me want to do. It really does energize my level of like sincerity and compassion in the world, and like compassionate action. And so I love how you put that.
And there's something about directing your energy in a really sincere or authentic way. These practices have also helped me with discernment. Sometimes we say yes to things that may not be aligned. Sometimes that yes is a reaction rather than slowing down. When I think about clairvoyance, it's the act of being able to see energy clearly, or the art of that. And it is such an art. There's like a trial and error to it as well, right? And so when you're applying that to yourself, it's like, how do I want to do? Like, where do I want to send my life force energy? What do I want to create? And I found that I was saying yes to too many things, and like really overburdening myself and getting burnt out. And that was just my way of being for so long. And over the last year, I really wanted to change that. It's part of the reason why I left New York, moved back here to Austin. I just wanted to slow down a little bit more, and only do things.
And not dilute yourself, right?
Yeah. And do things that felt authentic to me, that were a full yes, like in my entire body. Now I can feel when things arise, whether it's a full yes, like I really want to do this, a meh, which is like, maybe I'll like deprioritize it or think about it, versus a no, then I'll just be like, no, I don't want to do this, and that was my own patterning. Because when you're like, I'm a doer, I resonate with that so much. I spent so much of my life just doing things all the time and not enough time like resting, taking care of myself. And that is really important to me. It's something that I value.
So well said. I think, there's a lot I hope that folks are going to take from this, but that's a good one, is like trying out this really crazy new word that's called no.
It's hard.
It is hard.
Yeah, it's so hard.
I mean, like you said, in American culture, I can do that. Yeah, we can do that. Blame the timing. That's a good one. That's my little
it's a neutral
trick.
Thing.
The timing is just use the corporate teas. Alchemize the corporate teas in your own relationships and partnerships, and the timing is just not really ideal
really
at
bad.
the moment. Yeah, exactly. It's essentially an astrology play.
We're in a Mercury retrograde right now.
Right. I want to also talk about, clairvoyant. So we shifted over from Zen training, mindfulness training, coming into the body, and then actually started to see different entities and kind of what that looks like for you. We also talked about how in Vietnam, there's an animistic quality. And similar to Shinto in Japan, which is basically a shamanic animistic religion that was there when this guy from India's stuff rolled up. Because I think people think Buddhism from India. Took a while to get there, but it merged with Shinto.
It did.
It merged with some Tao from China. Right? And so Vietnam beautifully has this similar tapestry.
It does have a similar tapestry, yes. So the first Buddhists that came to Vietnam were, it was in the Mahayana lineage, but Vietnam had its own folk religion. And so when even Catholicism and Buddhism came to Vietnam, it actually intermixed with that. And some of those practices are still retained in the Buddhist tradition. So there's actually a role in like Vietnamese Buddhist temples where it's usually a woman, but she takes on the role as a medium, where she calls in the spirit of a teacher, of an ancestor, of a guru, for example, to embody that spirit, and to bring those teachings to the audience or to the congregation. I did not grow up Buddhist, so sometimes I used Christian terms to label things. But it's really fascinating that this folk religion in the Vietnamese sense kind of intermixed with these other religions. And it's really common, to your point, that the same thing happened in Bali when Hinduism came to Bali. It mixed with their own spiritual religion. And it is such an animist religion where there's a belief system that there's spirits everywhere. We have ancestral worship, for example, where we believe our ancestors could be freely roaming around unless we venerate them, have a space for them in our family's like shrine, for example. So all these things are carried on. I actually did not really connect the dots until maybe the last 5 years around this, because stuff would happen to my family. Both my mom and my father would have very paranormal experiences. Cousins, it was just like such a common thing. And we're like, oh, like that's so Vietnamese. Or like, we'll just like make jokes about that, kind of brushing it off. But then once I started training in clairvoyance, I was like, wait. Why is this happening to so many people that I know? And I have a lot of my clients that have reached out to me are also Vietnamese-American that have similar experiences. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. We just come from a lineage where these channels may just be really open due to our cultural practices, our spiritual beliefs over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. I'm the first person to be born here in the US. This makes sense. I get it. Like why I may be having these types of experiences. So to your point, thank you for bringing that up. Yes, it is really rooted in our culture, our traditions, and how that blended with other religions that came into the country.
That's so exciting. I'm from Texas, and it's kind of giving like Dia de los Muertos.
Yes,
a little
it
bit.
Is very similar. Yes.
There's some Latin American love for the ancestors.
Yes, it is really similar. Our practice, besides like on the Day of the Dead, which is common in Mexico, for example, in
the ofrenda.
The ofrenda, yes. So we do ofrendas every day. So you usually have an ancestral altar where you give incense, and you usually have like favorite foods and just basic principles on that altar, like water, fruit, incense. But it's on the ancestors' death anniversary that you do a specific prayer every single year on the day of their death. Usually it ends with a meal that you share with your family, with your friends, and it usually includes the favorite foods of that ancestor.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, so it's really beautiful.
My mother's mother, who passed about 11 years ago, is my guardian angel. And that makes me want to do something for her.
Yeah.
And she, this guy shared this stat. I'm sure you've heard it, but I told my wife, and she's like, that's like 2018 spiritual Instagram. But it hit me, which is the eggs of a female fetus are in the fetus.
Yes.
And so this guy's poetics put it so poetically. He goes, that means we were all in our grandmother.
Yeah. So it's like,
and he said that, I burst.
Yeah.
Cracked me.
It's wild, right? To think, the trauma or the things that your grandmother experienced, you also experienced like in her womb.
Right.
Yeah.
She was probably being subjugated by some patriarchal bullshit at some point in her life, like all women.
Yeah.
But particularly our grandparents' day. And so those chemicals, there's certainly a spirituality aspect to me, but the chemicals that she felt poured in at some level. So we're just carrying luggage.
Yeah. There's also geneticists have done research on this too. I can't oh my gosh, we should look up the exact term. There is a medical term for this. So when someone is under extreme duress or stress, your DNA can actually change, and it could actually affect your children. So your children take on markers that turn on or off, but it's a response to protect you from traumatic experiences, for example. So that's why certain people could be born with like low-level stress, feeling low-level anxiety all the time in their bodies because they have those markers turned on, perhaps from their grandmother or their fathers who went through maybe something stressful at the time. So it's interesting. It's not just the spiritual context that you're talking about, but there's science around that too.
Proteins will literally
they will markers will turn
off.
Yep.
And I believe epigenetics.
Yes, epigenetics. Yeah. There you go.
Not a scientist here, but I'm familiar with some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So coming back to your work.
Yeah.
You've been helping people deal with these things in themselves. You have like a traditional kind of, you have a website, you have a way for people to find you, but from what I'm aware, I'm sure people kind of find you exactly when they're supposed to in a beautiful way. And because you're so well versed in the esoteric traditions and kind of synchronistic qualities, that you're probably having to answer a few questions for people at the top that maybe say, oh, I'm having these experiences. I'm saran wrapped in my bedroom. What is going on, Madeline? What have been some of the themes that come up for people that you work with, and kind of how do you help them regulate?
I think one of the first things that I think a lot about in how I hold space is just being able to hold space to mirror people so that they could feel very safe. Like the first principle of any type of somatic practice as a practitioner is like, when we hold space and we mirror you, that allows you to move through whatever you need to move through, experience things however you need to experience them. That's why I love blending the somatic approach, and then with my clairvoyant practice, I am very comfortable holding space so that you can experience whatever you need to experience, no matter how kooky it feels and seems or illogical. And our body actually does not speak in a linear way or logical way. When you think about the language that our body speaks in, it's usually an expansion or contraction. And then people oftentimes process things through images, memories, colors, sensations, emotions. It's different for everyone, and it might not be very logical. But when we fully tap into the body and allow the innate intelligence of the body to just come online, and you fully respect that connection, there's like really beautiful things that come out of that. One example, I had a client, he was moving through really challenging things at work, taking on a lot of other people's energy, overburdening himself. And he wanted just time to process all of that. How he was processing things and how he was holding space, he was processing things in a very metaphysical way. Some of the generational trauma that came up, he experienced it literally as a demon coming into the room, sitting right here next to him, touching his leg, and for me, I helped him feel really safe, taught him tools to be able to navigate something like that. But because he was able to express and move through what he needed to in that way, it actually allowed him to process so much in a short period of time, instead of feeling like shame, guilt, hiding that way of expression. He was like, if I had talked to my therapist about this, they would have thought I was like a schizophrenic, and given me medication. Right. But it was like how he wanted to express things and move through things. And there was real fear in the room in that moment in time. And there's something about giving someone the tools and empowering them to move through experiences like that, and like to normalize them. That's something that I strongly believe in.
From a grounded place.
Yeah,
say,
from a
hey,
grounded
it's all right.
place. Mm-hmm.
Let's really sit with this. And then that power of awareness can help dissipate it. Ram Dass has a line. He says, the old me would have locked up who I am now and from the kind of
Yeah.
traditional therapy
Yeah.
situation, which, by the way, therapy's great.
Yeah. I love Tara Brach, for example. She's amazing. She is a psychologist. She wrote a book called Radical Compassion, and I love that framework so much. It's actually a tenet of a lot of my practices too. So if we can have radical compassion for how someone wants to show up, and we can hold space for them in that fashion to allow them to fully feel what they need to, accept it, investigate it, and nurture it, that makes a world of a difference.
And that's the RAIN method.
Yeah, it's a
right?
RAIN method.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When you said the demon came in the room,
Yeah.
that sounds spooky,
Yes.
especially for folks coming from Christianity, where that's kind of hit the fire alarm. Milarepa, however, is a Tibetan Buddhist saint that I'm reading right now. And there's all these great stories, kind of somewhat mythological. He's 1,000 years ago in Tibet, and the demons all come in the cave.
Yeah.
And he kind of bravely, makes them tea, essentially. If that's the image. And there's so much power in that.
There is
to
so
say,
much
hey,
power.
I'm not afraid. It's really kind of the get behind me Satan energy from Jesus, right? It's these guys, gals, whatever they are, they're not from the light.
Yeah, there's one thing I do want to mention, though. Whenever I give people readings or we hold space for people and very dark things come up, it's really important not to judge those things in a polar way. And, we are conditioned through media, through thousands of years of stories of this is evil, it's bad, we need to excommunicate it from your body right now. That's like a very polar way of actually looking at a picture and understanding the complete 360 of it. So, for example, with that client, when he was experiencing what he was moving through as an entity or as a demon, when we were actually able to sense it, feel it, dissolve it, allow it to be there, that actually turned into his grandfather, an image of his grandfather. And he realized that, oh, this is generational trauma that I'm carrying, right? If we were in that moment to say, this is evil, we need to don't look at it, let's erase it from your your energy field, remove it right now. That is a very polar way of
there's no processing.
My
no
teacher
alchemy.
was like, don't be a demon bigot. That's what she always says. And I laugh about that all the time.
I love that.
Because she's like, when we are using our clairvoyance and seeing energy, we sometimes will see energy in the form of something that could look very scary. But that energy could be holding immense years of pain, of anger, of fear, things that people haven't processed before. And as a practitioner, it's really important, one, not to freak out, and then label it something, and then shame that person, make them feel really judged. It's really important to me to, again, hold that space that's very, very safe and allow somebody to look at it 360. We cannot transmute our shadows unless we bring love, compassion, light to it, acceptance to it. And you can't do that when you're labeling it, satanic and stuff. And one other thing I will say, when you think about Satan, and how he was derived, and also the devil, Satan, they all come from different pagan religions and other traditions that blended with Christianity. When Christianity took over, Satan is actually the god of the truth and lies. So if you think about that and why he's been so distanced and Satanized and disapproved of, is because if he's also the god of the truth, what would happen if you found out the truth? Right? So I always like to look at things not so black and white, and to just label something that looks evil, we should excommunicate you and give you an exorcism right now,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not from a satanic perspective or whatever. That's from a grounded esoteric view to say this is all the mirror of ourselves, and this is what helps us overcome our negative aspects that we all carry. I'm glad that this is conjuring up another Thich Nhat Hanh image for me, which is he has a really good interview with Ram Dass on YouTube, which is
wow, I don't think I've seen that one. Oh my
it's
gosh,
unbelievable.
Okay.
It's the two of them talking for an hour.
That's amazing.
And it's like I get choked up in the first 4 minutes, and because Thich Nhat Hanh says they're talking about anger and kind of activism. They were both obviously huge activists as well, and there's an anger in activist spaces, that seems justifiable in some ways, certainly, but also what Thich Nhat Hanh says is what you want to do is transmute that anger into compassion, because when you're angry, you're not lucid.
Yeah.
You can't act with the level of clarity and precision that you can, and that you could if you were compassionate. And what he says is the process of transmuting that anger is holding that anger like a mother holds her baby.
I love that image so much. That's beautiful.
Isn't that stunning?
Yeah.
He says because the compassion is us, but the anger is also us.
Yeah. In internal family systems, which is a system within psychology and psychotherapy, we often talk about anger being the warrior for other emotions, right? That's the protector that comes out, the firefighter that comes out to protect that inner child, so that mother can hold the inner child. And you are right. It is a part of us. All those things are a part of us.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And then there was another image that when you brought up the kind of, again, the demon showing up, there's a fantastic book that I'm sure listeners are familiar with, which is How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. And kind of back to the shamanic practices, and psychedelia is obviously shamanic. That book is about psilocybin and kind of the shamanic healing, basically, that occurs from psychedelic therapy. And Michael Pollan references a woman who had cancer, and in her trip, in her psychedelic experience, she saw a very black energy / entity in the area in her body where the cancer was, and she got really angry and screamed at it and said, get out of here, and kind of used that mental state to navigate that. And the way he writes it in the book is that the cancer went away.
Wow.
And
that's really
she
powerful.
was in remission at the time of the writing of that book. So there's this, kind of in the shamanic traditions, there's this kind of astral surgery, right? Yeah.
It's because our physical bodies are very heavy in like the third dimension. We have other bodies. The spiritual body oftentimes experiences things first, and then you have your astral body, your energetic body, your emotional body, then mental body, then your physical body. So my esoteric teachings that I'm anchored to are more recent, from like the 20th century, just through my lineage, my teachers, probably more anchored to like Rudolf Steiner, Edgar Cayce, those teachers.
Mad respect.
Yeah, so it's more in the Western tradition. I'm also trying to relearn more from the Eastern traditions too. You mentioned koshas a little bit earlier as well. There's a lot of overlap. That has really informed a lot of these newer teachers in the 20th century, right? But when we think about that framework of looking at our more subtle bodies or higher bodies, there's a lot of stuff happening in these realms, for example, and we don't feel them until they're in the body. So when you do connect to your third eye, you open yourself up to see these things. What she experienced, some may call it a miracle, but in other lineage, they're just like, oh, of course, that makes a lot of sense.
Oh yeah.
It just
They got
sounds so
that-
foreign to like a Westerner.
They got the darkness out.
yeah.
Good job, lady.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
it's not
yeah.
that big a deal.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I think common too in the mystic traditions is this idea of remembering,
Mm-hmm.
you know, kind of undoing
Yeah.
is a big quality of the mystic practice. And that ties into original sin being a big old lie, because when we remember who we truly are, our capital T, true, capital I, identity, that helps a lot of these, you know, issues or obstacles or luggage or karmic, you know, build up or whatever start to melt away,
Yeah.
because we're remembering who we truly are, our infinity,
Mm-hmm.
our eternality, our identity with the one, with the whole, with the totality. You know, all of these other little things don't have the power to retain their
Yeah.
shadow nature.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, Bob. When we do remember who we are and we understand that we all return back to this one source, that remembrance really kind of hits your soul in a really specific way. And then a lot of people, I think, come out of these spaces feeling like, well, how do I be human at the same time? So I always like to anchor to, yes, we are fully divine and also fully human. How do we operate in this lifetime with this skin, with this ego? And sometimes those two things are very hard to bridge together. So I always like to think about my work as bridging the ethereal, where we are one, to the material, where we have a physical body. Like both those things are true. Yeah.
After the Enlightenment, the laundry, to quote Jack Cornfield's book.
After
Yeah,
the enlightenment, the laundry. Yeah.
We're still here.
Yeah,
you know,
we're
for
here.
now.
We're here for now. And I think for us to be here in the now, in the present, and to be fully embodied, being able to operate without the shame, without the guilt, without the fear, without being in these frequencies that cause people to react or, you know, put themselves in structures where they have power over other people, power over other people, you know, like there's something important about this power with model that I think a lot about. And we can't have power with other people unless we are able to heal ourselves first before we can, you know, heal the collective.
And relevant to your work with the collective, you're also a co-founder of Sanctuary Homes.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting, you know, I think another kind of spiritual myth bust too for me is like that all this stuff happens in a vacuum, or that it all happens with the individual, and that and that's important because like you said, you have to we're all trying to reach a level of like awakening and understanding about ourselves in order to be more effective in the world, in the game, if you will. And at the same time, there's this level of like interdependence.
Yes.
Right. And so you were the one who said, you were kind of making a joke about the term sustainability.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think that term has been around for so long, and I think it's really lost its meaning. When we dissect that term, it literally translates, or not translates, we're speaking English, it literally
etymology of it,
defines the definition of sustainability. Literally means doing little to no harm. Where we are right now on Earth, that is not enough. You know, we've hit all of our planetary boundaries, and when we're in this place, how do we leave this beautiful mother, this beautiful earth for our children? I know you're a father as well, Bob. I don't have kids yet, but I think about this all the time. You know, how do we do that? And so one thing that Sanctuary Homes anchors to is regeneration. So we are a social club that helps people reconnect to self, community, the earth through our programs. But essentially, our mission is to build these bridges back to these ancient systems of care, community, culture, so that we can accelerate this paradigm shift to regeneration. When I think about that term, regeneration, it means being able to leave the earth, leave whatever you are doing better than how you found it, being able to use less energy while you're producing energy. A lot of the principles of regeneration anchor to permaculture, which some people associate with farming. When we expand this beyond farming, how do we apply these principles to our life? We think about people care, we think about earth care, we think about fair share. That fair share is something that I think is really important. If we're all living in a state where we're over consuming, over spending, just over every, we like consume so much here in the United States. If we actually change that model to just do a little bit less, and it doesn't have to start with really big acts of service. It could start off with something really small like composting. We all have compost here in Austin. The city offers that as a service. If we all started doing something small like that, or even just applying that same principle to your life, leaving things better than how you found it. If you let me borrow your car, Bob, for example, and you had, half a tank of gas, maybe I'll give you your car back with a full tank. That's like a very small act in which I'm consuming less energy and leaving you with more. And that's what I think about, fair share, people care, for example.
And that's what's required right now, right? Because the inertia of capitalism and industry has just been take for so long.
Yeah.
And, I think also simultaneously you're an extremely intelligent person, and it's not necessarily going to be solved by one person's actions, but that's not the point. The point is that your contribution, and by planting those seeds of awareness through your own embodiment of it, through your own work, there's a contagious quality, right?
Yeah. Some of these problems can feel so big and so heavy, like gravity problems, which make it hard for people to solve. This is whenever I like to think about the analogy of community as a tapestry that's woven together. With globalism, you have a tapestry that can stretch very wide, but there are a lot of holes in that tapestry. How do we take a pause from that and think about our local ecosystems? And can we fill in those holes locally to strengthen the global tapestry? So that's why, individual work is really important. Community work is really important for your local community. And that also impacts like the larger global collective as well. But not enough of us are thinking local enough. And, hence why we have supply chain issues. If I'm going to liken this to our economy or to the industry. Yeah, right. We have supply chain issues. When we had the pandemic and everything closed down, people running out of toilet paper, all these things are meant to awaken us to think about ourselves, our local community, and how we can actually strengthen those.
It's really good advice. And I echo a similar sentiment in my book about, it's overwhelming if you look at all of the needs that the earth and the people have. And kind of what I've come to, I think, in my own practice and is pick one, pick two, it's like, kind of, and not burning out on it to the point earlier, right? Because then you're much less effective. But like, if you're really concerned about people not eating, then go work for the Central Texas Food Bank on Sundays, because they could use you packing sandwiches for folks that are hungry. You can literally do that, and it will only cost you a few hours. And, there's no shortage, essentially, of opportunities to volunteer and to serve and to pick up trash. Shout out Kelly Stewart of Garbage Humans of ATX, who's one of our mutual friends. And, it's, and Austin, I think in general, just to be like a proud Austin boy, we are kind of an example in some areas of this. Community First Village is a great example, which is about, I want to say there are nearly 400 tiny homes in East Austin now. That is formerly houseless human beings that now have homes. And I know that LA folks have met with them. People in big cities in America are paying attention, going, this is amazing. This is a potentiality. So Alan Graham, who's the head of Mobile Loaves and Fishes, that started that years ago, he was just a finance guy in the 80s. He was good Catholic, by the way. Shout out. They exist. That's mean. There's a million straight Catholics. But he was just like, there's a lot of homeless people. And I'm making a decent amount of money, and this is messed up. And so he put a bunch of bread in a van and drove around, and that's Mobile Loaves and Fishes. And then after 20 years of that, he said, can we build some homes for some people, and that was just one dude's idea that he's now, this massive tidal wave of service in Austin that's a beacon for other cities. So yeah, I think compartmentalizing our contribution and saying, where can we make an impact? And where, almost to me, it's like, where does your heart light up?
Yeah, where does your heart light up? What is your capacity, those are all really important. Like, if we don't have capacity because we're really burnt out, well, take care of yourself first. Put the mask on yourself first before you put the mask on another person.
Right.
Hear that on the airplane a lot.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, you love gardening? Good. Grow a really good garden for a couple years in your backyard.
Yeah.
Figure it out. Learn what doesn't grow in September and what does in July, and nothing grows in July in Austin.
It's too hot.
And then guess what? Then you can start a community garden and you can teach kids and young people how to do it.
Yeah, but even if you grow your own food, that makes such a huge difference off of carbon emissions of food being shipped from other countries to your grocery store. You can literally walk behind your backyard and pick your own food, that makes such a huge difference. And when people talk about solving this crisis that we're on right now, sometimes we can anchor to first principles. I was listening to this podcast by Zach Bush. He's a doctor. And he talks a lot about healing the soil. If we're going to go back to first principles, if we actually healed our soil, we would be able to heal ourselves through the food that we eat. We would be able to heal the earth because balance would be brought back. Topsoil during the age of the dinosaurs was like 20 foot deep. Now it's like less than 20 inches deep. And topsoil is really important because those nutrients are needed to grow very healthy food. And that healthy food can keep you from being sick. Our microbiome interacts with our food, with the soil. I can go on a whole nother tangent about Roundup, about pesticides, and how that's such a horrible situation. Maybe we can save that for a different podcast. But when I think about soil health, and it really lights me up. I know that sounds very nerdy, but I think that is a first principle thing. If we were able to heal our soil, and you could do that in your backyard, it doesn't have to start really, really big with like a scientific experiment happening or anything like that. But when you like re-anchor back to these principles of growing your own food, you pay attention to everything. How's my soil? What is my soil makeup? What does it constitute? How can I grow specific types of food in this type of region? You just become so much more connected to the earth, and just the single act of doing that is already very healing.
I really enjoy all these ideas, and I think what your work does really well is like, and is surprising to in a lot of ways and unique to say, yes, I'm psychologically counseling people. You're clairvoyantly counseling people. You're dealing with the mind, you're dealing with the body, you're dealing with the spirit, and you're also not neglecting the relationship to the earth and the community. So like, hats off to you and your work in terms of like, you're hitting all the levels, Madeline, and it's really special to me and really important because I think so many of these, typically people are doing one or none. And so cheers to seeing how it all connects and, having that kind of dharmic responsibility, right, to all of it, to all the layers of it, to all the koshas. So I salute you for that. I think maybe the last question I have for you is, how can someone, aside from working with you, reach out, links in the description, but, if they want to just get started on healing a part of themselves that's perhaps frustratingly still there, not talking about myself at all, from like a behavioral pattern or just something that kind of keeps coming back up, what would you recommend from like a practical methodology?
Yeah. I think awareness is important. So many people have so much awareness. For you to even ask that question, I'm assuming people are like, oh, I'm noticing this pattern is coming up over and over again. What do I do about it? When I think about breaking patterns, we have to feel safe in our body first to break those patterns. Patterns happen, or conditioning happens usually as a protection mechanism, or we were taught something from our parents, our childhood, and then we take on those behaviors. That could be challenging to break those behaviors, but I have found that when you expand your capacity to take on new ways of being, that could feel scary at first because you're going to hit contraction. When people hit contraction, your nervous system is going to go into a fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And you're going to be like, stop, I don't want to do this. I'm going back to my way of being. But when we hold space for people to move through contraction to expansion, that expansion creates new pathways so that you're like, oh, it's not so scary after all to adopt this new way of being. My life is not going to be in danger for doing it, So one practice that I teach, I think I have a video of it on my Instagram. It's like one of the first videos. It's like, how do you feel you're feeling safely? And in that practice, we practice something called pendulation. So how do you feel pain or grief in your chest and really hold space to feel those things? And then how do you pendulate to another area that feels really resourced? And when you do that, you're actually training your nervous system to go from, oh, I'm feeling so much stress right now, I'm going to a stress response. Oh, here's a place of resource. And actually by moving through both of those places, oftentimes there's a third energy that could be a huge release. That could be new insights, memories, sensations, but mostly you're holding space for that contraction to simply just be there and to be safe, to feel like you are resourced and you know how to find that resource in your body. A very, very simple practice, something that someone can do in any moment, add to their meditation practice.
That's really fantastic. So noticing where it is in your body and kind of indicative of probably where it is on a variety of levels, and then finding another part of your body or another part of your existence, your essence, where you're rocking out, and just having those two kind of share some of those resources, if you will. Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, because when you think about polarity, things are truly not polar. They usually come back around, right? Like when I think about grief and love, they're the same side of the coin. When we sit in grief and we allow ourselves to process grief fully, we realize that all of these emotions that we're feeling are simply love for a person that's not there anymore. And when we realize that, I just hit the mic.
That's okay.
When we realize that, that's like almost this act of pendulation, right? And then you end up, in my experience, moving down like a middle path because you realize like, oh, these are actually the same thing.
That's really lovely. I feel so calm talking to you.
I feel calm too. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, thank you for holding space.
My pleasure. Your presence is just tangible, and thanks so much for being here. I'm thrilled to point people to your work, and I'm excited. It's kind of my mantra lately too has been like, I'm just getting started.
Yeah.
Even though there's like an egoic voice in the back that says like, no, you've been doing this for a long time, and and it's like, no, I'm just getting started.
I feel like we're always always getting started.
We're always
Yeah.
getting started, and
Mhm.
you're just getting started, even though you came through the
Yeah.
dark forest
Yeah.
of the chaos,
Uh-huh.
but you came out and you found the oasis, and
Yeah.
you're helping people locate that for themselves. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.